I'm delighted to be speaking to Gresham College. I'm a very keen adherent myself of the college. It's all free, as Barbara said, and I've attended many lectures, so I'm delighted to actually be up here on the stage myself tonight. I can recall with disappointment turning up and not getting in when Professor Cormack spoke about aspects of Byzantine history, so I'm glad that you're all in tonight. The Gresham College itself, funnily enough, I was very close to Gresham College, or the old Gresham College. My good friend Michael Manelli, who's the Professor of Commerce, or a former Professor of Commerce at Gresham College, has recently moved into new office premises there, which is on the Gresham Street and Basinghall Street. And in fact, there's some rather wonderful stained glass windows depicting the coat of arms of Thomas Gresham and the city and the Mercers Company. So that was rather strange as I attended a function at his office recently. Thomas Gresham's badge, as you know, is the grasshopper, and this assisted me greatly with a freedom ceremony some years ago when the Guildmeister, the Burgmeister of one of the Zurich guilds came to London. They had all been processing at the Lord Mayor's show, and they're all in their splendid sort of medieval pomp and pageantry. And on the first Monday after the Lord Mayor's show, the Burgmeister, the Guildmeister, was admitted to the Freedom with the Lord Mayor in attendance. And they usually say, Murray, can you dig out some interesting historical facts and artefacts about the various recipients? So, of course, Switzerland, I delved into the archive, but one is reminded of the wonderful film The Third Man with Orson Welles, Harry Lime and so on, where I think he made the observation that Italy, you've had 500 years of bloodshed and murder and rape and pillage, and it's produced Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and the Renaissance, and Switzerland has had 500 years of heavenly peace and tolerance and democracy and understanding, and what has it produced? The cuckoo clock. Anyway, I delved into the archives and was saved, of course, by Thomas Gresham, because I pointed out on top of the Royal Exchange, you see a splendid golden grasshopper, the badge of Gresham, and what is the name of the football team from Zurich? Grasshoppers. And fortuitously, he actually supported Grasshoppers as opposed to FC Zurich, so I struck lucky there. Well, look, let's plunge into this. Sheep over London Bridge. I think most people, when they talk about the freedom of the City of London, associate it with sheep over the bridge, and we can see a rather fine one there, which is in the waiting room of the Chamberlain's courtroom. A very charming lady gave me the sheep. What you can't see is that its hind leg is broken because one of the cleaners didn't realise how fragile it was and unfortunately has snapped the leg off. So if anybody's good with super glue, perhaps they can come and help me mend the sheep. Ladies and gentlemen, of course you can't take sheep over London Bridge. I'm very sorry about that. I know this is a great disappointment to you all, but unfortunately the City of London Police, when they're not dealing with rioting students and anti-capitalist protesters, are not keen on Freeman taking their sheep over London Bridge. In a sense, you can't blame them. There's buses, there's taxis, there's thousands of commuters, there's people on Boris bikes. It would cause absolute traffic chaos if Freeman were to take their sheep over London Bridge. However, if we go back in time, it was a valuable privilege, economically speaking. It wasn't so much that you could take the sheep over the bridge, it was that you didn't pay the toll. And of course, by not having, you were taking the sheep to Smithfield Meat Market to sell them for a good profit, and not to pay the fee would obviously enhance your profit margin. So that was the real advantage of it. Now, you could bring cattle, pigs, goats, hens, ducks, geese, anything you wanted over London Bridge and not pay the toll. But in the Middle Ages, the bedrock of the English economy was the wool trade, the cloth trade. And it said, of course, that the sheep went over the bridge in much larger numbers than all the other animals put together. They actually paid for the building, the maintenance and the repair of the bridge over the centuries. So hence, sheep over the bridge. But as I say, I wouldn't recommend it today. From time to time, we do have sheep over the bridge, and we can see a rather charming example here. I think this we had a Welsh Lord Mayor this year, a couple of years ago, David Rowell Thomas Lewis, who was very enthusiastic about taking sheep over London Bridge. And unusually for a Lord Mayor, he was very au fait with the lambing shed. I shouldn't think most Lord Mayors know the back end of a sheep from another, but he actually has a small holding in Carmarthenshire. So in conjunction with one of the livery companies, the World Traders, they had this special sheep drive. As you can see, it got a little crowded. The police weren't very kind to them, and they concentrated them mainly on the pedestrianised pavement over there, but you get a flavour of it. The police were relatively kind because, as you can see, they didn't ticket the farmer who brought up his sheep up from, I think it's Romney Marsh in Kent, but normally the city parking wardens would have got that one. Some years ago, I gave a man with a very large flock the freedom of the City of London, and as you can see, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was, I said, even you, sir, can't take your flock over London Bridge, and he was very charming, and he said, well, he said, I do have some sheep in a field near Canterbury, and to be quite honest with you, I have a lot less trouble from them than I do with my real flock, which I think sums up the state of the Church of England. We're very ecumenical in the Chamberlain's court, and we had another man with a very large flock recently, so I'm afraid to say I made the same joke with him. But now, one of the largest sheep drives, I think, was when, in the millennium, Clive Martin was the Lord Mayor, and he had a very memorable sheep drive. He had pedigree Jacob sheep. They were all, not any old mutton for the Lord Mayor, they were all buffed up, the wool was blown dry, the hooves were gleaming, yellow bibs and leads, health and safety, of course, and the master of the goldsmiths company sort of marched these sheep over the bridge, and then he passed bowed and he gave them to the master of the merchant tailors company, who marched back over the bridge, and he bowed, and then he gave them to the master of the haberdashers company, and he marched them back across the bridge. I should think the sheep were pretty tired at the end of this, because bear in mind there are 108 different livery companies of the City of London. However, Clive Martin was a clever man, and he did not invite two of the livery companies to participate in this. He didn't invite the woolman, and he didn't invite the butchers, both of whom I think would have spoilt the affair. The woolman would have, of course, shorn the sheep, and the butchers would have obviously would have had some lamb chop and mint sauce. So that was a very memorable occasion. Well, look, I can sense you're all getting rather anxious now, having sort of addressed the question of sheep. And you're probably thinking, well, what are the privileges of a freeman if I can't take my sheep over London Bridge? And there are some very charming freedoms, privileges. I mean, you can be hanged with a silken cord if you commit murder or treason. You could wander around the city with your sword drawn to defend yourself from footpads. You're exempt from the press gang. The Navy can't have you. You're far too valuable as a freeman or craftsman to be carted off to sea. And the right to be drunk and disorderly in the city and to demand safe passage home from the watch. Now, I suspect if some of the students out there try that today, it wouldn't work. But no, I'm afraid none of those are applicable either. The remaining privileges are of a charitable and educational nature today, and relate to, well, for example, if a poor old freeman gets run over by a bus, then the widow can go to the corporation's almshouses free of charge. And sometimes the wives get quite excited at this, and you're almost thinking that they're going to push the poor chap under the bus to get to these almshouses. They're not actually in Knightsbridge or Belgravia, they're in Brixton. And I remember one chap phoned me up about this. He said, I'm very interested in your almshouses, he said, in Brixham, in Devon. I said, Brixham? I said, no, it's Brixton, London. Oh, he said, oh. But they're very nice. They're actually, they've all been refurbished and modernised and so on, and sheltered accommodation for the elderly. Now, if the freeman has any poor orphans, he can go to the Freeman's School at Ashstead in Surrey without paying the fees. And there's also, for decayed and decrepit freemen, there's a fund of about 17 shillings, 6 and 10 and sixpence or whatever that's paid at Christmas. So there are the modern privileges. What is the freedom? Well, really, I mean, it is very ancient. The freedom goes back to the Middle Ages. I'm only the 37th clerk at the Chamberlain's Court since 1294, which I always think is a very telling statistic. And I can remember the freedom itself goes back a little earlier than the clerk, to something like 1237. And I remember giving an American the freedom, and I said 1237. He said, lunch. I said, you idiot. I said, not PM, this is AD. Or is it ACE or something they call it now? I don't know. It is largely symbolic today. The freedom of the City of London is largely symbolic, but historically it was a very valuable document. The freedom was the right to trade. It would enable you to carry out your trade or your craft as a member of one of the livery companies of the City of London, mercers and grocers and drapers and haberdashers. It was, you can see it was a working document, because we still today, this is what the freedom looks like. It's a bit of parchment, the white you can see rolled up there, and it is folded up and put in this little pouch or wallet, which is given to the new freeman. And the thing was, it was portable. You could carry it about the city. The Victorians had a variation on the theme, and we had these rather lovely little freedom caskets made of light wood, balsa wood, and the copy of freedom would be rolled up and put in it. But you could see the key element of all of this was the fact that it was very portable. It was lucrative. The great John Wilkes, who I alluded to earlier, said that every time he gave someone the freedom, he said, "I give you joy," because he was giving them really a license to make money. These were monopolistic trading rights in the richest part of the kingdom, the City of London. Now, there were two catches. Everyone is looking delighted at the prospect of this. Two catches. One was the fee, and medievally the fee was a lot higher proportionately than the rather modest sum of today, which I hasten to add no longer swells the coffers of the corporation, notwithstanding what you read in The Guardian and the New Statesman, but it actually goes to the Freeman School for the aforementioned foundation scholarships. And then secondly, the Lord Mayor would expect that you would maintain standards of excellence and quality in the goods produced and the services provided. So bakers wouldn't give you stale bread, vintners wouldn't give you sour wine, butchers wouldn't give you rotten meat. That was really the essence of the medieval freedom. And this lasted for centuries until the Victorians came along. And they didn't like monopolies and cartels. They liked free trade, laissez-faire. So the requirement that you had to be a member of a livery company or a guild to obtain the freedom was lifted, and the freedom was widened to incorporate those people living or working in the city. And this change came about in 1835, and since then we've had the two strands. So people come to the freedom for two reasons. One, through a livery company, because although all the regulation and these issues have long since gone, if you wish to rise within the hierarchy of a livery company, you still have to have the freedom of the city to enable you to become a liveryman and then become a member of the Court of Assistants, perhaps, and then a warden and the master being the pinnacle. And then secondly, people who are nominated or recommended for freedom. And there's these two strands of freedom. The business takes place in the Chamberlain's court. Here is the Chamberlain. This is Christopher Billsland. He's been the Chamberlain since 2007, and I think he's 75th Chamberlain since 1237. The Chamberlain of London, it sounds all very Gilbert and Sullivan, and don't worry, I'm not going to burst into song. He actually is the Director of Finance. He is the Borough Treasurer. He looks after the money. Now, some people who know the corporation say it's all rather puzzling. Why would he look after this ancient, or be responsible, ultimately responsible for this ancient custom going back to the 13th century, when you have a ceremonial officer called the Remembrancer, who is also appearing in The Guardian, isn't he? He's the chief political lobbyist, apparently. But the Remembrancer is also the ceremonial man. He looks after the Lord Mayor's show, and he looks after the election of the sheriffs, he looks after the state banquets, and all the pomp and ceremony of the city. Now, the answer to why he is not responsible for the freedom is that the fees, of course, as I alluded to earlier, were in the Middle Ages a big chunk of the corporation's income. So for that reason, the ceremony is looked after by the money man rather than the ceremonial man. And this little quirk has remained. So we have the Chamberlain. Actually, he carries out very few ceremonies himself. He generally delegates them to me as the clerk. But we have a small team down there of me. There's a deputy, there's a beadle, there's a calligrapher who writes all the copies of freedom. Of course, the rest of the department never know what we get up to because they're all SIPFA, IPFA, bean counters, number crunchers and chartered accountants. There is, now, how to apply, you have the two ways, really. Well, you actually have several ways, two main ways. The first one is really by redemption, i.e. payment. The payment is the fee, which I mentioned earlier, which goes to the Freeman School. So if you are coming via a livery company, it's £25. If you are coming by nomination, it's £30. Because the livery company was the ancient historic route, they've always kept the difference, a slightly different charge, a slightly different price. You would have to come and apply for the freedom, you have to come to the Chamberlain's court, you have to bring your supporting documents, and then it goes to either of the courts where it will be approved. The Court of Aldermen for the livery companies, or the Court of Common Council for those coming by nomination. People say, has anyone ever turned down? And it's highly unusual because in essence you've been vetted before you actually come, because the people nominating you, the Lord Mayor, Alderman, Sheriffs, Common Councilman or 2 liverymen, would have carried out a check or whatever, would only put people forward who they consider to be fit and proper, and likewise with the livery companies. Having proceeded with that, you would then come to the Chamberlain's court for the ceremony where you're formally admitted to the freedom. And we can see there is the old Chamberlain's courtroom, or the courtroom that existed between something like 1950 and 2005, when the Guildhall was refurbished. And during this major refurbishment, the Chamberlain's courtroom was portable, and we removed the rather splendid surroundings of the Guildhall Art Gallery, we had a small room in there. And you see much of it follows us around. You can see the bench, the chair, the tables, and so on. Until 2008, we moved into the current courtroom. Again, the features have followed us around, and you can see the splendid Chamberlain's carpet. There's also, it didn't come to the art gallery with us, but it has the seal of the Chamberlain interwoven in the carpet, and you can see the seal above the bench and where the chair is, the sword of St. Paul and the keys of St. Peter, and the Chamberlain interwoven into the carpet. At the ceremony, you'll be greeted by the beadle. The beadle will announce you. You will step forward. You'll read aloud the Declaration of a Freeman, which is as follows. I do solemnly declare I will be good and true to our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, that I will be obedient to the Mayor of this city, that I will maintain the franchises and customs thereof, and will keep this city harmless in that which in me is. That I will also keep the Queen's peace in my own person, that I will know no gatherings nor conspiracies made against the Queen's peace, but I will warn the Mayor thereof or hinder it to my power, and that all these points and articles I will well and truly keep according to the laws and customs of this city to my power. Non-British and citizens have the option to substitute our Sovereign Lady with Her Majesty. So the Freeman is then invited to sign the Freeman's Declaration book. You can see that there. And we have a calligrapher who writes in all the details there, countersigned by the clerk. And they are then given their copy of Freedom, which you saw earlier in rolled-up version, but that's what the Freedom looks like. It's parchment, sheepskin, goatskin parchment, and the calligrapher will write and the details. It's been like this for centuries. In the courtroom, we have some hanging on the wall. The one is from 1781, and it's virtually exactly the same as this one here. It has the coat of arms of the city on the left, the red seal of the Chamberlain on the right, the name of the Freeman, the name of the Lord Mayor, the name of the Chamberlain, the monarch, the date of the Freedom. They are then given the rules for the conduct of life, a very splendid book written by a former Lord Mayor, Sir John Barnard, for the benefit of his wayward young apprentices. He meant it as a guide as to how they should behave to him and to the world in general. It is full of very sage and good advice. They used to be blue, they're now red, and in the middle, the vicar of St. Lawrence Jury came for his freedom some time ago, and unlike most freemen, dare I say, he actually read the book from cover to cover and found it all very enlightening and has produced a modern-day translation. The book is all written in charming 18th century English with lots of biblical allusions, and he's written a modern one, and in fact hosts an annual lecture on aspects of the rules for the conduct of life, which I commend to you. There is one tomorrow in the Church of St. Lawrence Jury, which I think is at 6 o'clock, so if you can attend, you'll be more than welcome. So Barnard's rules for the conduct of life. Barnard was the Lord Mayor of London in 1737, and he was a member of the Glovers' Company. And if you wanted to be the Lord Mayor in those days, you had to be a member of what's called the Great 12. When you attend the talk on the livery companies, if some of you come to that, you'll find out about the Great 12. But they're the richest, the most powerful, the most influential livery companies. My goodness, declared Father George, Sister Mary has stripped in the Vatican corridor, you will find to be a very useful mnemonic. Mercers, grocers, drapers, fishmongers, goldsmiths, skinners, merchant tailors, haberdashers, salters, ironmongers, vintners, cloth workers. If I see any of you afterwards, there'll be a test. My gorgeous darling, for goodness sake, make haste, for suddenly I'm very cold is another variation. Barnard, I suspect, would not approve of either of those, because as a devout Christian, he would have taken a dim view. However, he translated, he switched from being a humble glover to being a rather grander grocer, and this enabled him to take the mayoralty. And he was very successful as Lord Mayor. He's very astute financially. We could have done with him 2 years ago. And Walpole, the Prime Minister, famously offered him the post of Chancellor of the Exchequer, to which he said, "Tush, I wouldn't want that laborious task for a mere £4,000 per annum. This I can earn easily and honestly in the city." I don't know if that's the case today. Some time ago, we were in the presence of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's that rather dour, grumpy Scotsman who is in, where is he? Cowdenbeath, Kirkcaldy, somewhere like that. We never hear of him now, perhaps luckily. But anyway, we were giving the freedom to Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve of the United States of America. Greenspan was in London on his last trip in that capacity before he retired, and Gordon Brown was very keen he should be given the accolade of the freedom of the City of London. So he phoned up a rather bemused Lord Mayor at the Mansion House and said, "I want you to make Greenspan a Freeman." And the Lord Mayor said, yes, we can do that. So there we were in this elevated company. Greenspan and Mervyn King was there, and all these highfalutin financial figures, the Chancellor. And of course I couldn't resist it. I said, yes, Barnard, tush, laborious, £4,000 per annum. And I was rewarded, amazingly, a smile. Yes, incredible. Sort of a smile, a wintry grimace. And actually, I got him to smile twice. I mean, I don't think Tony Blair managed that in 10 years until he said, "I'm retiring." But no, we had to line them up. The beadle, in his frock coat and his top hat, lines them up. So he said, "Dr. Greenspan, you stand here at the head of the table, flanked by your nominator, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor, by Deputy Michael Snyder, Chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee of the City of London." And then I sort of threw caution to the winds, and I said, "Oh, and Chancellor," I said, "can you stand here on the left?" And there was another. I didn't try my luck a third time. Yeah. Now, giving people the freedom is absolutely marvellous, and one of the most interesting aspects is hearing the variety of renditions of the Declaration of a Freeman. I read it out to you. I thought I read that quite well, actually, but you hear a tremendous variety. My wife said to me, she said, "Are you not fed up of hearing that declaration every day of the week?" But some people read it even quicker than Lewis Hamilton going around the corner at Silverstone. Some people read it very slowly. Some people are rather shy about the whole business and sort of hide behind the declaration. Ladies can sometimes be coquettish, and they're sort of peering around the side of the declaration. Some people read it very quietly. Others read it very loudly, and I always remember the Sergeant Major from the Scots Guards, retired, who came in once, who was absolutely terrifying. He thought he was reliving his youth. He was back on his parade ground. His chest was puffed out. His face was bright red. His moustache was bristling with menace. He positively bellowed the declaration at me, and I felt like a palm tree in a tropical hurricane. It really was absolutely scary. A very learned priest, not the Archbishop of Westminster, Vincent Nichols, but another learned priest, read it to me in Latin, which was very impressive, but sadly the school I went to, I never got beyond a mo, a mass, a mat, so whether or not it's very good Latin, I don't know. However, recently I heard the best ever rendition of the Declaration, and of course it came from this lady, and it would do, wouldn't it? So Dame Judi Dench was a cross between Desdemona, Lady Macbeth, Queen Victoria, Hedda Gabler, all rolled into one. It was an absolutely brilliant performance, and I'm afraid well, look, as Barbara said, my name is Murray Craig, and of course I couldn't resist this. I said to her, "Look, Dame Judy, forget about that Daniel Craig. What about Murray Craig, licensed to thrill?" She said, "You might be quite good at that," she said, so fingers crossed. I don't know, 006.5 maybe, but I was a bit tactless with Dame Judy. I said, "Well, I see you all the time in the films, and you're always in every film, British film, but I haven't seen you on the stage for a while. I think the last time I saw you was you were a rather terrifying Lady Macbeth." And she said, oh, good God, she said, that was in 1976. And I made it worse, because I said, oh, yes, that would be right, because I was revising for my English Literature O-level. Anyway, I said, you were terrifying. You were quite right. You were terrifying. It was at the Young Vic with Ian McKellen as Macbeth. She said, oh, no, I know I was terrifying because one of my groupies was a retired vicar from Worthing, and he came to every single performance of the production, and he always sat in the same seat in the front row. And when I was doing my bit, exhausting Macbeth to slaughter Duncan and stab him brutally until the blood spurted and bathing my hands in the blood, he was literally cowering on this seat, hiding behind a crucifix that he was holding up. She said, oh, God, it was very disconcerting. Now, the ceremony is fairly solemn, but obviously you have these humorous moments. And another scope for humour is at the end, I'll generally say, well, that concludes all the formalities. Well, the beadle says a round of applause, and I say, well, that concludes all the formalities. And now, informally, might I suggest you kiss your wife or husband or whatever. And, of course, this can lead to, is full of disaster. I said to one chap, a kiss from your lovely wife. And he said indignantly, she's not my wife, she's my secretary. He'd brought the PA along to sign the photo, take the photos. The poor old PA is got to do everything these days, multitasking. Mind you, I was half right, because she might not have been his wife, but she was lovely. I mean, I wouldn't have minded kissing her myself. There was another chap who was as old as the hills. And I said, a kiss from your beautiful daughter. And, of course, you can guess the rest. I remember a lady coming for her freedom, and she was terrified, absolutely terrified. The beadle opened the door. She was ashen-faced. Her teeth were chattering. Her knees were knocking. She was in a state of abject fear. And she was accompanied by a sour-faced father who had offered her no encouragement, help or guidance. She was certainly not up to Dame Judy's standards. She somehow mumbled and bumbled and stumbled her way through the declaration, which was gently swaying in front of me like a tree in the wind. I said, will you sign the Freeman's Declaration book? Her hand was shaking like a leaf. And then I said, well, that concludes all the formalities, and now informally, might I suggest a kiss? She rather misinterpreted this, leapt on me, gave me a very passionate embrace, a smacker of a kiss. I had lipstick all over and smelling of French perfume. The beadle thought it was hilarious. He was doubled up with laughter, but he got a bit miffed because he didn't get a kiss. The father was like Queen Victoria. He was not amused. I had to placate him. I said, well, I didn't mean that. I meant to kiss you. The girl was crimson. She was scarlet with embarrassment. And, of course, when I got home that night, I was in a lot of trouble, because my wife said, what's all that lipstick and why are you smelling of French perfume? Anyway, the beadle today is very helpful to me because he will check on the status of guests and he will say, will you stand here with your wife on your side here, your sister there and your whatever, so I know who they are now, so we get round that. We also, it's very interesting, the Chamberlain's Court had various legal jurisdiction, and we would arbitrate in disputes between masters and apprentices. And invariably, it would be the apprentice who caused all the trouble because he was behaving like that lot out there, drunk, idle, indolent, staying out all night, absenting themselves from the workplace, shoddy workmanship, even making merry with the master's daughters. Occasionally, the boot was on the other foot. It might be the master who was in trouble because he had beaten the apprentice excessively, he'd locked him in a garret, fed him on bread and water, or worse still, not passed on the skills and the mysteries of the ancient art of becoming a haberdasher, a skinner or a wax chandler. Anyway, it didn't bother the clerk. It was the master or the apprentice. They were up before the clerk, and he had similar powers to the judges of today. A stern word, a fine, or in the most extreme cases, you would be dispatched to the Bridewell lockup, 14 days, bread and water. Sometimes the freemen look rather anxious at this stage, so to reassure them, of course, I reiterate that, in fact, we haven't had a court case in the Chamberlain's Court since 1917. That was the last occasion. And in many ways, this is a great pity, isn't it? I mean, I can see some of you smiling in the gloom, but for me, it's very embarrassing at a party. What do you do? I work in a court, but I haven't had a case for 90-odd years, so you get some very funny looks. The engraving shows the Chamberlain's Court in its Victorian pomp. You can see me behind the bench looking like something out of the works of Dickens. The little fellow looking positively angelic is the wayward apprentice in his white pantaloons. The plump fellow's the master who he's offended. The poor old mother's weeping tears of shame on the chair, the humiliation her son has brought to the good of the family name, and the father is looking rather nervous and apprehensive, twisting his top hat in apprehension at the level of the sentence or the fine or the fee. Ladies and gentlemen, the jurisdiction still exists, and this got me into trouble about 5 years ago when I was giving the freedom to a very distinguished, a very eminent barrister, a QC, and as you can imagine, it gave me some great pleasure to tell the wife of our then Prime Minister about the perils of the Bridewell lockup. And it may be that Tony's going there soon when the Iraq inquiry reports, I don't know. But Ms. Booth, for it was her, was very charming until I mentioned the business of jurisdiction. And then her eyes positively lit up, and she said, "Excuse me," she said, "can I ask you your authority for saying that?" I said, "Yes, you can. It's Evans Austin, the law relating to London apprentices, 1890, chapter 5, page 107. Well, it shut her up, yeah. No, she looked quite surprised, quite taken aback. And I said, "With great respect, Miss Booth, this is a narrow area of the law. I'm not surprised that even someone as illustrious as you has not come across it. But if you so wish, you're more than welcome to have a look at my dusty copy of Evans Austin." She smiled. "No," she said, "no, I will rely on your wise counsel." I should have said that will be 1,000 guineas, but anyway, actually she was very nice. I mean, I know she has this terrible reputation in the Daily Mail, but in the flesh she was absolutely charming. So that is the Chamberlain's Court and its legal jurisdiction. We have another aspect of the freedom, which is the honorary freedom. Now, sometimes people get rather confused with this. They think they're getting the freedom, they're thinking they're getting the honorary freedom. But the honorary freedom really is what it says. It's the highest accolade that the corporation can bestow on an individual citizen. And these people, this is a roll call of British history. This ranges from Nelson and Baden-Powell and Kitchener of Khartoum and Winston Churchill and Florence Nightingale. It really is a roll call of British history. They receive a splendid illuminated manuscript like the one here to Lord Nelson, together with a gold box to the value of 100 guineas, or perhaps 200 guineas. And we can see a splendid example of a gold box, a freedom box there. Or if you're a military gentleman, you'll get a gold sword. That's a funny angle there, but there's a rather splendid gold sword. The gold sword was given to General Beresford in 1806. This was for a bit of British Imperial daring-do. We'd just taken the Cape of Good Hope off the Dutch, and the fleet were on the way home, and in those days you had to go a fair way out into the South Atlantic to get the trade wind to blow you back. Popham, the admiral, Sir Home Popham, said to Colonel Beresford as he was, "Well, we've got the regiment in the hold, shall we take a slight detour and ginger up the Spanish?" So they took a left turn, sailed up the River Plate, took Buenos Aires by storm, sacked it, looted it, pillaged it. The fleet went home with booty, bounty and Spanish doubloons, and Beresford was left to keep our garrison our new colony. Great rejoicing in London when Popham got back. He hired 6 carriages. They took all the booty and the doubloons to the Bank of England. It was all paid in, and the Lord Mayor, a grateful Lord Mayor, said, "Right, we'll make you an honorary freeman and Beresford an honorary freeman and give you a gold sword of honour." Things, unfortunately, were not going so well in Buenos Aires because the Spanish, after the initial shock, regrouped. They retook the city after 8 weeks, and Beresford, unfortunately, was forced to surrender, albeit with full military honours. Sometime within a year, of course, ironically, instead of fighting the Spanish, Beresford was their ally. Napoleon, of course, had invaded the Iberian Peninsula, and Beresford was part of Wellington's expeditionary force. In fact, he was given command of the Portuguese army. It was felt that they needed stiffening with good British officers. So here is Beresford's sword, which we have on display in the courtroom on loan from the Museum of London. Lord Nelson received the freedom in 1797 after the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, the defeat of the Spanish fleet, the poor old Spanish again, and he got this splendid document and a gold box to the value of 100 guineas. We found out the following year how much he enjoyed being a freeman, and he wrote this rather nice letter. He's just sunk the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Vanguard, mouth of the Nile, August the 8th, 1798. My Lord, the Lord Mayor, having the honour of being a freeman of the City of London, I take the liberty of sending to your lordship the sword of the defeated French admiral, Monsieur Blanquet, who survived after the battle, and request that the City of London will accept the sword, will honour me by accepting the sword as a remembrance that Britannia still rules the waves, which that she may forever do. So it really was stirring stuff from the national hero, and it put the corporation in a great quandary about what to do. We couldn't make him a freeman again. We wanted to reciprocate his kindness, but we couldn't make him a freeman again because he was already a freeman. So what we did, we passed a special resolution in his honour, gave him another illuminated manuscript, and rather trumped Monsieur Blancet's sword. I should add, Blancet's sword was broken because, of course, when the Frenchman surrendered, he snapped the tip off before handing it over to Nelson. Well, we gave Nelson a gold sword studded with diamonds, and that's Beresford's sword, but the Nelson sword would look virtually exactly the same as that. And in fact, if the museum above us were not shut, you can see both the Blancet sword and the Nelson sword on display upstairs in the gallery. So do come back and have a look at those. So now, we also gave the freedom to Florence Nightingale. This was in 1908. Now, I can see some of you looking very puzzled at that because the great deeds were all in the Crimea, but I fear to set this in a historical context, of course, I should say that women were not given the honorary freedom in the 19th century. Sorry about that. Florence was only the second one so honoured. And of course, by the time the freedom was offered to her, she was so aged and infirm. She was 88, bedridden and ill. She couldn't actually attend the ceremony. And a great pity, but she still had all her marbles, and she wrote to the Lord Mayor. She said, "I'm very honoured by all of this. I cannot attend, but my great-nephew will come in my stead. But please do not give me a gold box to the value of 100 guineas. That is far too ostentatious for a lady of my great age. Will you instead send a cheque for 100 guineas to my nursing charity at St Thomas's Hospital and give me instead a plain and simple wooden casket?" Now, as you can see, the corporation don't do plain and simple. That is the wooden casket, the Angel of Mercy, Crimea, Inkerman, Sevastopol. It has columns, lions' heads, soldiers, her initials in enamel. It really is an absolute masterpiece of craftsmanship, and we are indebted to the Florence Nightingale Museum at St Thomas's Hospital, who have kindly loaned us the box for display in the courtroom. Amazing. Very poor slide. Churchill was given the freedom. 1943, the height of the Second World War. Guildhall had been very badly damaged. Churchill was not given a gold sword or a gold box. He was given a wooden one. You can see it on the table, on the centre of the table. It's a very symbolic wooden box because it was made from one of the charred timbers salvaged from the great Guildhall roof above, which had been destroyed by the Luftwaffe in 1940. The artist is Frank Salisbury. The painting is at the Guildhall Art Gallery. The artist is Frank Salisbury, and he actually got a vital moment of the ceremony wrong. As I alluded to earlier, the key moment of a ceremony is the right hand of fellowship and you being greeted as a citizen of London. Salisbury erroneously depicted the Chamberlain on the left picking up the box and physically giving it to Churchill. The Lord Mayor, Samuel Joseph, this being Keith Joseph's father, the Tory politician who was an old boy of the City of London School, said this is all incorrect. He would never do that. The vital moment's the handshake. I want you to change the painting. So there was a real old kerfuffle. And anyway, the painter had to give way. And what he's done is he's moved the box from the hands of the Chamberlain, he's put it down on the table, he's moved the Chamberlain's left hand up to touch his furry robe, and he's advancing on Churchill with the right hand to shake him by the hand. All good and well. What he failed to do, he didn't change Churchill, who rather rudely, as you can see, is staring into the mid-distance and certainly not extending his hand in a fraternal greeting. Salisbury wrote a very grumpy letter. He said, "My Lord Mayor, I have carried out these changes as you have requested. Frankly, may I say, you have now reduced the status of the casket to that of a mere cigar box," which, when you think about it, is very appropriate for Winston Spencer Churchill. Another recipient of the freedom was Pitt the Younger, and we can see a splendid cartoon here depicting the scene of Pitt attending, not the Chamberlain's court actually, because Pitt was a member of the Grocers' Company and the Chamberlain acquiesced to him carrying out the ceremony carrying out at his livery hall, the Grocers' Hall on the left. It's a super depiction of it all. You can see people hanging out of the windows and flags and bunting and It's a bit blurry. The pub is the Lord Chatham, who was Pitt's father, and the mob are paying great respect to the Prime Minister, the young Prime Minister, because they are pulling his carriage by hand. They've taken away the horses and are pulling it by hand. They extend the courtesy to the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff, also in the carriages. Now, as you can see, they are what we would call city trenchermen. They've had rather too many city dinners, and I feel sorry for the mob who are pulling those two, as opposed to the rather fit and slim Prime Minister. Much toasting and celebrations in the Grocers' Hall, and then Pitt repaired back to the West End, to Berkeley Square, where he was living, up St James's, past Brooks's Club, Brooks's Gentlemen's Club, where the Whigs hang out. The Whigs were not so keen on Pitt the Tory. They saw the carriage, they came out, they were enraged. There was a pitched battle during which the Prime Minister had his hat knocked from his head. So I hope the Freedom ceremony is a bit more peaceable than that of Pitt. Here is another interesting example of the first occasion that the Honorary Freedom was given not to an individual, but to a group or a body of men. And this was the City of London Imperial Volunteers. The Boer War was going badly for Britain, and the Lord Mayor, Alfred Newton, you can see him centre stage, raised, in a fit of patriotic enthusiasm, raised his own regiment, the City of London Imperial Volunteers. And as a mark of their gallantry in enlisting, the entire regiment were given the Honorary Freedom of the City of London, and the scene here depicts it. There's especially another thing we have for display in the courtroom is this very fine silver inkwell, which was produced, a commemorative inkwell, of which they all signed their name in the book, all the 1,700 members of the regiment. There were about 3 or 4 different ceremonies, each of 400 or 500 people at a time. I live in St Albans, and when you live in St Albans, you go to dinner parties, it's very boring because all they talk about is the price of houses, the local schools, and how awful the First Capital Connect train service is. And if you were on it on Monday, you would know that because it took 3 hours to get to London because of signal failures. My friend Peter was at one of these dinner parties, and he started to tell me about his collection of medals. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, oh, yes, it's my pension. I said, you're very astute. I said, have you got anything from the Boer War? He said, oh, yes, the Queen South Africa medal. Which is the one on my left, Cape Colony, you can see. And I said, well, have you heard of the CIVs? Thinking, oh, no. He said, yes. He said, I've got one of those. So Peter, very kindly, has loaned me this set of medals that belongs to Cyril George Ridby Matty. And he's loaned, instead of being in a bank vault, they're actually on display. He's a brave man, Matty, because he survived being shot at on the veldt by the Boers. 14 years later, he was on the Western Front, Colonel of the London Rifle Brigade, Pipsqueak and Wilfrid, and he's got the 2 territorial decorations as well, the green ones. So it's marvellous that these can be on display in the courtroom. And I must say, one of the most moving ceremonies I did was for a gentleman by patrimony. People born after their father obtained the freedom can obtain it as of right. This chap's father was a CIV. He got his freedom in 1900. The fellow was born in 1921, so what was he? He was 80. He was nearly 90, and he came along. He could have got his freedom on reaching the age of 21. I said, you've waited a long time for this. He said, I'm not really a joiner, but when I gave him the freedom, literally he had a little tear in his eye. He was following in his father's footsteps retrospectively, almost a century on. And I also had on display at that time the Freeman's Declaration book of the City of London Imperial Volunteers, and his father's name was in that. And it was a very moving ceremony. The most famous member of the City of London Imperial Volunteers was Erskine Childers, who wrote The Riddle of the Sands. He had a very bad end for an honorary freeman because he was executed by a firing squad. From being an ardent imperialist, he ended up as a fervent Irish nationalist, and he ran guns to Ireland in the Easter Rising and so on, and then carried on fighting for the Irish against the British in the Civil War, and then the War of Independence. And then when the Civil War, after partition broke out, the treaty, he carried on the Civil War fighting for the IRA against the Free Staters of Michael Collins. A Free State patrol caught him. He had a pistol in his pocket. That was sufficient to convict him of treason, and he was duly dispatched by his own adopted countrymen. What a sad end. The irony was the pistol was an antique, it didn't work, and another irony was it was a gift the previous year from none other than Michael Collins himself as a thank you gesture for his efforts against the British. It's a very murky world, Irish politics. Now, we see some very interesting people getting the freedom. We had a right old carry-on here. Core blimey, I'm proper posh now, said Barbara, and she was great fun. And Barbara's amazing, isn't she? I shouldn't tell you this, but she's 73. Yeah, extraordinary. Yeah, she's when at the end of a ceremony. Generally, I advise the recipient that the rules for the conduct of life, the red book you remember from earlier, tells you as wayward apprentices to stay away from taverns, inns and hostelries. I'm very kind, so I usually waive that, and I say you should now repair to the nearest tavern. There is a toast. The toast is the youngest freeman. Now, this always causes some confusion, particularly to somebody of your Barbara's age at 73 or whatever, because it's nothing to do with the age. It means that they're the newest. It's the most recent. They're the youngest freeman till the next one comes along. And today, for example, I admitted 9 people to the Freedom, so some people weren't young for very long. The youngest freeman I always remember was Guy Botwright from Littlehampton, who looked very surprised to be told he was the youngest freeman, as he was aged 101 at the time. You can see why he looked so surprised. We had a chap from the Stationers and the Newspaper Makers Company receiving the Freedom some years ago, and I thought, that would be right because, you own most of them. So there's the Master of the Universe. Well, maybe not so much now. Wendy is perhaps the Master of the Universe. I don't know. But anyway, the week before, his PA phoned me up every day. What does Rupert have to do? What does he have to say? Where does he have to come? Who can he bring with him? What does he have to wear? Where does he park his limousine? And he doesn't want any publicity. At the end of the week, we were old friends. The PA was called Sarah, and we were on first-name terms. She rang up every day. She asked me the same questions. I gave her the same answers. I said, with regard to publicity, don't worry about that. Discretion will be exercised. I'm not being very discreet, ladies and gentlemen, because when Murdoch came, he came with this lot, and he's got the chief executive of Sky, the chief executive of News International, the editors of The Sun, the News of the World. They're all there. Andy Coulson, Rebecca Brooks, Les Hinton. In fact, they're all sacked, aren't they? So no publicity apart from his own publicity. It was very funny, yeah. So that was a very interesting Freedom ceremony. The gentleman in the top hat on the right is the Beadle, of course. I've been talking about the Beadle. There is the Beadle. He's an ex-copper. He's very stern, and he's terrible when the children come at half-term and the Christmas holidays, because he's always frightening the life out of them by saying, have you seen Oliver? Do you remember what happened to the children in Oliver, what the Beadle did? He sold them. So he's a terrible man, the Beadle. We've all been enjoying Downton Abbey, haven't we? And Julian Fellowes is married to Lady Emma Kitchener. That is her uncle. This is the great-great-nephew of Kitchener of Khartoum. The Chamberlain, Chris's predecessor, Peter Derrick, is clutching the Honorary Freedom of Kitchener of Khartoum, which was given to him in 1898 after he routed the dervishes at the Battle of Omdurman. So Kitchener duly came along for his freedom ceremony, accompanied by his great niece. There she is, Lady Emma Kitchener. What a splendid hat. It's absolutely extraordinary. The Beadle's eyes were blinking when he saw that. And of course, it's a bit of a hoo-ha, because Julian Fellowes is saying that when he dies, he's a bachelor, he has no son and heir, the title will die out. The only living relative is Emma, and it should go to her. And that's interesting enough, one of the plots, isn't it, in Downton Abbey, the entail and so on. I did some research. The job is great. You can research. We've got wonderful archives. And so I delved into our archives and discovered that an account in Kitchener's diary. He said, I attended the Guildhall today. It was a simply splendid ceremony. I was given an absolutely wonderful illuminated manuscript together with a rather tasteless gold sword studded with diamonds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have seen the gold swords. I don't think it's particularly tasteless. So I said to the Earl, I said, well, if he thought it was tasteless, can we have it back, please? And I'll put it on display. He said, oh, God, I said, I don't know where it is, he said. And she piped up, goodness, Uncle, you really ought to try and find it. Look in the loft. It's tremendously valuable. So we haven't had it back yet, but it'd be rather nice. Kitchener then said, I was taken to the Mansion House for a splendid 8-course banquet. They do things in style in 1898. And I was attended upon by the dignitaries of the city, by the Lord Mayor, the Aldermen, the Sheriffs. I had to make a speech. This filled me with much terror and trepidation. I would rather have fought the Mahdi on 10 occasions at Omdurman than make a speech to the Lord Mayor, the Sheriffs and the Aldermen of the city. So that very stern man with his bristling moustache who's exhorting you to sign up for your king and country was actually in a panic about making a speech. Now, recently, I'm sure some of you might have seen Who Do You Think You Are? And Len Goodman good old Len discovered that one of his ancestors was a freeman of the City of London. So I delved into the archives and discovered, we got the archive up, the book, the Freeman's Declaration book, and the entry for his his ancestor, who was a member of the Weavers' Company, and we made some discoveries, and it was all quite fun. And I got an accolade from my children who said, "Oh, it's very good, Dad." The headmaster came up to me and said he saw it, and he said, "Mind you, it shows up your wrinkles." So they're very unkind children. But Len was absolutely charming, and he subsequently came back for his own freedom ceremony, together with some of his family. He read the Declaration, and again, I couldn't resist it, ladies and gentlemen. I said, "That was very good, Len. I'll give that 7." Now, I think at this stage of the proceedings, I've got a copy of the Rules for the Conduct of Life here, and I remember giving the freedom to Tony Adams, the former Arsenal and England footballer of some repute, and when I gave him the Rules for the Conduct of Life, I gave it to him with just a bit too much of a flourish. As I brandished it like this, Tony erroneously thought it was a red card, and he was being sent off. His head drooped, and he started trooping towards the door. The beadle chased after him and said, "Tony, come back, don't worry, he's not sending you off, it's the Rules for the Conduct of Life." If Tony had read the book a little more carefully in his youth, he would not have had all the trouble he subsequently had with birds, booze and gambling, and he wouldn't have got into so much trouble. But at this stage of the proceedings, I think I'll give myself the red card and conclude my lecture and invite you to ask any questions if you have any. Thank you.
If it wasn't usual for women to be given the freedom of the City of London, how come Florence Nightingale had it? How was this great inconvenience overcome?
Times were changing. Times were becoming more enlightened. And one thing, it's very interesting to note that women have always received the freedom, stretching back to the Middle Ages. It was rather fascinating. If, as I alluded earlier, it was the right to trade. So if, for example, a goldsmith died, he had some premises on Cheapside, and he would have had a shop front where the goods and wares were on display. He would have had a little factory at the back, cottage industry, where they were making things. And then him and the family would live above, and the apprentices would be on the floor above that. So if he died and the business were to fold, if he didn't have a son and heir, then in these circumstances, the business would go to the wife, the widow, and she would be given the freedom to enable her to carry out the trade. So in some ways, although ladies weren't getting the honorary freedom until the 20th century, the freedom in other ways was very enlightened. You think when it went right back to the Middle Ages. Today, I would say the split is, it's perhaps 60-40, something like that. But because, of course, a lot of the livery companies, the modern livery companies now, virtually all of them, not all of the livery companies, the vast bulk of them now do admit ladies, particularly the modern ones, because they're the professional ones, the accountants and the lawyers, and of course half of that is made up of women anyway. There's another one over there, I think, one there. One up there.
You said the first one freedom was given, was it 1237? Any idea why they did it? What started the idea?
Well, in essence, I think this business of controlling the guilds and exercising standards of quality control and trading standards, really. Mm. There's one down here.
Do you have any examples of freedom being taken away?
Do we have any examples of the freedom being taken away? In a way, the corporation, the Lord Mayor and so on, would entrust that the livery companies would regulate themselves. They would police themselves. And because they were getting a very good deal with these monopolistic trading rights, they in fact had very fierce punishments for their members who transgressed. The baker who gave you stale bread would have a yoke around his neck with a stale bread dangling off it, and people could pelt him on Cheapside. The butchers would have the rotten meat hanging outside the premises. Spectacle makers would have the faulty spectacles dashed upon the London stone and trodden into it. So, in essence, they really regulated themselves. But if you were a real rotten apple in the barrel, then you could have the freedom taken away. It would be you would be disenfranchised, and you would still have to make a living. So, what would happen? You would go to the town nearest that had both a guild and a market, and that was Coventry. So you were sent to Coventry. So that's an offshoot of the world of livery. The last time someone was disenfranchised was in the middle of the 18th century.
Thank you very much for a wonderful speech. I think it has been enjoyed by all here. I can see you are going to be a very hard act to follow. My question is, how long have you been doing this? And what qualifications one should have in order to succeed here?
I sometimes, Well, how long I've been, I became the assistant clerk in 1997 and the clerk in 2001. What are the qualifications? I fell into this job. I used to work in housing management, and I ended up on the Barbican estate, which is part of the corporation's mighty empire. And although it was very interesting, you were sort of pig in the middle between the corporation as the freeholder and the residents as the leaseholder. And the residents on the Barbican were very articulate. There might be some here tonight. They were very demanding. They wrote very good letters if roofs were leaking or service charges were going up. And I was getting rather disenchanted with that. And the corporation, as I'm sure many of you know, is a very funny beast. It's a local authority, but it isn't. It's older than Parliament. It has all these other, its own police force, the Old Bailey, the Green Lung for Londoners at Epping Forest and Hampstead Heath and whatever. It runs the Barbican Arts Centre for the benefit of the nation. It has its electoral law and so on. And of course, we used to, before the internet, we used to get blue sheets which had internal job vacancies. And it would be extraordinary things, normal stuff like street cleaners and engineers and whatever, and then it would be verger at Epping Forest, bridge master at Tower Bridge, city marshal. You have to, one of the key job requirements is the ability to ride a horse. And then one day, assistant clerk of the Chamberlain's Court. Now, I had read history at university and was always interested, and I applied on a whim. I got on very well with my predecessor as clerk, and there you have it. Fell into it. But I don't know, you need a bit of history, a bit of law, and a bit of being an actor, I suppose. Yeah.
I know this might be a bit obvious to everybody in the audience, but were there originally, when it was originally established, could you expand on what kind of religious bars there were on Freeman, or were there religious bars, or were there any bars according to religion on becoming a freeman when the office was initially established?
Well, I don't know. I suppose everyone was Catholic originally, and then with the Reformation, everyone was Anglican. But you're right. No, there were bars. There were anti-Catholic, Catholics and Jews. But until the 19th century, changed in the 19th century.
Could you tell us whether this system of licensing tradesmen was unique to London?
That's a good question. The answer is no. There are, in London, of course, it's vibrant in that there are 108 different livery companies still surviving, and more in the pipeline. There are 3 more that are coming on board. But every large medieval city would have a guild system, and this still exists today. In York, for example, there are the Merchant Adventurers of York, the Merchant Tailors of York, there's the Merchant Adventurers in Bristol, there's the Cutlers of Hallam, there's the Tuckers, Fuellers and Shearers in Exeter, and in Glasgow you have the Incorporated Trades. But really it is extraordinary how it survived so much in London, whereas in other places it has sort of died away. And other cities, of course, also have freedom, and they have some of the peculiar, everyone gets excited about the sheep, but, for example, the freemen of Newcastle can graze their cattle on the Toon Moor or whatever, behind St James's Park, the football ground, and there are other privileges. But they don't do it to the extent that we do. I mean, last year, 1,685 people received the freedom of the City of London. I think in Newcastle and Hereford and Leicester and so on, they might have one freedom ceremony a year where sort of 20 people are done, and it's usually by patrimony. So it's incredible, really, how it's survived and been so vibrant in London. But there were roots elsewhere.
Thanks also for an excellent talk. You may have answered my question by implication by referring to kids who've inherited or have automatic right to the freedom if they are born after the award to the parent. As a proud Freeman, I'm getting increasingly harassed by my now adult children who had the misfortune to be born before I was awarded the freedom and are badgering me as to whether they have any head start at all or whether they must, I suppose, adopting your figures of speech, have to plough their own furrow.
They will not be able to come by patrimony. Yes, patrimony, you have to be born after the parent obtained the freedom, the father or the mother. And I should have also mentioned servitude as another key way in, whereby people are apprenticed to a master and they're bound to the master in one of the companies, and they learn the skills and the mysteries of the ancient art of being a haberdasher or a skinner or whatever. They serve their term, they produce their piece for the master, and then they will get their freedom by servitude. And of course the whole idea of that is it's all it just carries on, just like patrimony. You would get the freedom because you would follow your father being a cooper or a haberdasher or a skinner. It just seemed natural that you would follow on in the Middle Ages. So in answer to your question, they would have to come by nomination. So if you have access to a member of the corporation or two liverymen, I'm sure they'd be happy to nominate. Or, I mean, well, I could probably sort that out for you. There's an organisation called the Guild of Freemen, who are a very active society, who are a historical society. They have banquets and events and functions, lectures, tours and visits. So they also help in certain circumstances if you explain your enthusiasm for freedom and the fact that you don't have ready access to a nominator. The freedom is very democratic and open to all, generally.
Thank you so much. One of our only rules is that we don't go on for over an hour, and especially tonight, I know you've got a difficult journey back, although I hope everything's opened up a little bit by now. I just love all these quaint city things. We've had the pageant master, we've had someone for the Chamberlain. I'd love to get the remembrancer, or as we call him at Gresham, the forgettancer. And we've got something coming up about the livery companies and something coming up about the apprentices. So I think if I live to be about 300 years old, I might start to get to grips with this City of London thing. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, all of you, for braving the barricades and coming tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.